Hi, Miami Design District. I am Nina Johnson, the owner of Nina Johnson Gallery here in Miami, Florida. And I'm taking over the district's Instagram today to chat to you about how the gallery is continuing to run, our current exhibitions, and we're going to check in with Miami-based artist Emmett. We're going to hang out here for a couple of minutes while everyone joins us, and I hope everyone is safe out there and that this will provide a little glimpse into what's happening with a couple of people here in South Florida. I see Genius Jones on there. Hi, Daniel. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Again, we're just giving a few minutes for everyone to check in here. Nina Johnson, and we're going to be chatting today with Emmett Moore and talking a little bit about our current situation. Special thanks to the Miami Design District for having me on today, and to Nazo Group for facilitating all of this. See what time it is. Give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. I'm chatting with you guys from my home here in Miami, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that. I'll be showing you some images of the works that I live with here, talking about the artists that we're currently showing at the gallery, and just kind of checking in. So let's get started. For everyone that's just joined onto the stream, my name is Nina Johnson. I'm the owner of Nina Johnson Gallery here in Miami, Florida. We opened in the fall of 2007 as Gallery Diet, and a number of years ago changed the name and moved up into a 4-building compound in Little Haiti. We are just up the street from the Design District on Northwest 2nd Avenue and 63rd Street. And we are a contemporary art gallery that shows a range of artists from quite emerging, often giving artists their first solo exhibitions ever in a gallery, to quite established. We've had the honor of showing people such as Betty Woodman, Judy Chicago, Genesis Breyer Peorage, Terry Allen. We currently have an exhibition of historic works by Beatrice Wood on view. And I myself am a Miami native. I was born and raised here. And I have to say, this is the first time that we've been dealing with something like this. Like so many people, it's quite an unexpected challenge. But, one of the things that has been tremendously comforting, and one of the things I want to speak about today, is the sense of community that we have in culture, and particularly in the visual arts. So South Florida has been a relatively small arts community. We have the incredible advantage of having Art Basel in our backyard once a year, and having some of the most extraordinary private collections as well as public institutions. In the recent past, we've had some incredible architectural commissions as well as public artworks go up, but we still are very much sort of a small town when it comes to supporting one another. And I think, I like to say that even though we're based in Miami, we're connected to a global community of like-minded people through the artists that we show and the people who support them. And over the past couple of weeks, over at the gallery Instagram, we've been doing live chats with the artists whose shows were scheduled to open when all of this happened, as well as different artists whose projects were interrupted as a result of COVID. And it's really given an incredible platform for us to be able to connect with our audiences. So, really the level of engagement and appreciation for what artists do has gone up tremendously. And hi, Anna. I see Anna on there. I just wanted to say hi back. But, for me, that's definitely been the most touching thing. I like to say that we live with people, not so much objects in our home. And I think this whole experience has been a reminder of that. So a couple of weeks ago, we had the work of Katie Stout on view. We had an incredible solo exhibition by Katie, Sour Tasting Liquid, open. And fortunately, that was able to be open to the public for a number of weeks before we had to shut down. It did cut the exhibition a little bit short, but we felt really lucky that it had the time that it had to be open to the public and on view for everyone. And we ended up closing that out with a quick live walkthrough with Katie and our digital audiences. That was really wonderful. It just gave Katie the chance to reconnect to people and discuss her practice. And then we had 2 exhibitions that were scheduled to open. One of them by the Nashville-based artist Shannon Cartier-Lucy. So Shannon is somebody who was recommended to me about a year ago. And we started planning this exhibition. I think often people don't realize how much time and planning goes into a show, how far in advance it's been scheduled. And when this first started happening, Shannon, whose partner is a professor at a university in Nashville, said to me, "I'm not sure that we're going to be able to have an opening." But, we've kind of dealt with having openings in spite of hurricanes and natural disasters, and we figured, why do this any differently? And so, we were able to get all of the works here in Miami. And unfortunately, the opening actually had to be canceled, but we were able to install the show, and we were able to have a couple of visitors by appointment. And so that exhibition has continued sort of despite the current atmosphere. The second exhibition that opened was Elsa Hansen Oldham's Trinity. And Elsa is an artist from Louisville, Kentucky. So we were really, looking with both of these shows to highlight 2 women artists that were working outside of New York City, outside of Los Angeles. I'm always interested in thinking about, a more diverse art world where people are not just concentrated in major cities, but we can find talent all over the world. And so Elsa makes incredibly detailed and often comic needlepoint stitchings, and that is the focus of the show that's in our upstairs gallery right now. So both of those exhibitions were able to be installed. It was quite strange to only be able to connect to our audiences for those shows digitally, but it did give us a sort of more intimate view of the artist's practices, because we were able to do this type of live stream video and really hear what the shows meant to them in their own words. So I think often when we open a show, we have an opening, the artist is there, people talk to them for, 5 minutes, if that, and then, the work is left to speak for itself, which is wonderful. But in this particular climate, what happened was, we were really experiencing each piece on a screen and then hearing the artist's interpretation of it. And so, it's been a unique way to experience both of these shows. And, I think it's been interesting to see how different artists have reacted to this moment. I think for both Shannon and Elsa, there was tremendous interest digitally, but nothing quite replaces the feeling of having people experience your work in the flesh, in real life. And particularly in the case of Elsa's work, which is so detail oriented, there are things that make us realize the importance of a real experience with art. It's really really can be the difference between experiencing something digitally, right, the way we are doing now on Instagram and on these tiny screens, and having an emotional connection to an object when you're sharing a space with it. So, both of those exhibitions are scheduled to remain on view through May 15th. We are hoping that as things continue to improve, we'll be able to take appointments for people that want to come in and view the shows on their own. And, it's been interesting to work from the space. I wanted to take a little bit of time to show you guys some of the objects that I live with here in my home, starting with one of our favorite pieces, which is a commissioned work by Emmett, who's going to be joining us today. And we sort of I chose to show you guys some pictures of these objects in their natural habitat. So nothing has been, cleaned up or picked up for your viewing pleasure, because, one of the things that new collectors often ask me is, how do you live with something like this? And I think the answer is organically. This is a piece that we commissioned Emmett to make in response to our house. Our home is a craftsman style bungalow, and so craftsmen are often known for their woodwork and their built-in cabinetry, and Emmett, of course, took that interpretation and really went next level with it. I love this image because you can see a couple of drawings by our two little boys. We have two sons that are 4 and 6, and just our sort of knickknacks and books that we treasure. This we love, with Papa Hemingway in Key West, who is such an iconic, the original Florida man. And, you see the sort of figurines and all the things that you actually live with in a home coming into play here. Some of the other objects that I've really been enjoying spending time with. This is it's our entry foyer, and the ceiling here was done by Jim Drain, who was a Miami-based artist. He actually had a studio in the Miami Design District for a number of years before he moved to Providence, Rhode Island, where he lives currently and teaches at RISD. And Emmett's ceiling was inspired by quilts done by the Miccosukee tribe here in South Florida. The textile piece on the wall is done by Anna Betbies, who is now based in Los Angeles. And Anna creates those works by burning and dyeing and kind of being really physical in her space with these objects. And it's something that we love to live with because it expresses so much warmth. I think you can really feel her presence in the piece. And, that goes back to this idea of kind of living with people and not with objects, right? The cardboard work on the right is done by Rochelle Feinstein, who's an incredible painter. She's sort of, one of the icons. There's a great Memphis lamp there, as well as an antique doll and a mixed media sculpture by Nicholas Lobo, who's a Miami-based artist as well, who also at one point had a studio in the Miami Design District. And this is another view of the same room with a piece by Barbara T. Smith, a work by one of the artists from Creative Growth, a chair by Jonathan Mickey, and a photograph by Francesca Woodman. And then here, I think here is a space that I always like to talk about because we have this painting of my grandmother. And it's connected to the Terry Allen piece and to a Nathalie Provosti painting. And I always think it's important to kind of mix your influences, right? You don't necessarily want everything to be all one style. That's not the way people live, and it's not the way artists are inspired. So I think it's important to show the range of references from which people often work. This is an Anne Craven painting of the moon on the right, and then a Nicholas Lobo piece on the left. And this piece was from the first exhibition that we did with Nicholas in our old space when we were still Gallery Diet. But I love this painting. It's so tactile, and I feel like, you just, you can feel his kind of sculptural sense in the work, even though it's a 2D piece. And we also have a Gaetano Pesce vase that was a gift from a friend of ours. This is in the same room, and that's our Cassie Namoda next to a Josh Abelo drawing. Cassie is actually scheduled to have another exhibition that will open with us on May 22nd. So that show will be installed, and we're hoping by then at least visible by appointment. That will be Cassie's second solo show with the gallery. She's now represented by Goodman Gallery in South Africa and living in East Hampton. And I wanted you guys to see, because our dining room is currently being used as our homeschool. So I think, I was emailing with someone this morning about how do you live with art when you have tiny children? For some reason, this is cropping the image, you can't see it, but what's next to the Cassie Namoda is a quite graphic photograph by Genesis Peorage. And I think for us, it's always been important to expose the kids to everything we're exposed to and everything we find inspiring, and sort of introduce, here's all of our sons' homeschool artwork with one of Anne's moons. These pieces were a gift from Anne when our children were born. One moon is painted exactly an hour after the other moon, and our boys are 16 months apart. So this was her sort of way of relating the boys to the moon. And this is our living room. So we have, the ceiling is original from 1928 when our home was built. My husband was able to uncover the original fresco. And, it's another great example of how you can live with contemporary and historic works. The piece over the fireplace was a gift from Judy Chicago, and it's from her iconic Atmospheres series, which were photographs and performances done around California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The piece that you can sort of see on the right was done by Nicola L. Nicola was a pioneering conceptual artist and designer. She lived in the Chelsea Hotel for over 40 years, made a lot of political work, and this piece was from a banner. It was a series called The Penetrabe, where you would wear the banners for performances and protests, but also they would hang on the wall as objects. And Nicola, we were fortunate enough to work with her sons on an exhibition, a posthumous exhibition of her work. And on the left, you can see our newest acquisition is Katie Stout Fruit Lady. And the pillow that you see kind of draped over the couch is also by Katie. We live with so much of Katie's work, and we just adore her. Katie and Emmett went to RISD together, which is also Jim Drain's alma mater. So there's definitely these kind of fantastic relationships between the artists, and they inevitably, speak to each other when they're all living in a room together. And above the window, you can barely see it, but there's a small blue painting above the window that was done by Seth Cameron. Seth Cameron was a founding member of the Bruce High Quality Foundation. There's a number of these works actually in the DACRA art collection. They're part of Craig Robbins' collection that are up in the DACRA offices in the Design District. And Seth is an exceptional painter who's really interested in light and color. And now he's also the director of the Children's Museum of the Arts in New York City. So if you guys are looking for wonderful content that is arts driven but also accessible to children, please check out their Instagram and support what they're doing, because they're really sort of driving the ability to connect to the arts through home, even though it's done through the digital space. And then also I want to point out that the streamers that are hanging all over our house are from our son's 6th birthday. They are not part of the permanent decor, though they certainly look great in all these pictures. It's just, we try to be very playful with our home, and on a typical day, we typically have an open door policy. We host a lot of parties and events for our artists. The artists that show at the gallery are always staying with us. staying out in our guest house. And so I think for us, that's kind of been one of the biggest challenges, is to be, without our community of friends. And it's what I appreciate so much about these objects, is it's the way we keep the house alive with so many vibrant, influential personalities that have meant the world to us over our lives. And even though they're not physically here, they're here through their objects. So I'm gonna loop Emmett in. Again, as I was saying, Emmett Moore is a Miami-based designer, and he was actually the first Miami-based designer to exhibit at Design Miami. I'm waiting for him to jump in here, but so Emmett was the first Miami-based designer to exhibit at Design Miami. We were thrilled to be able to produce that exhibition with him. We gave Emmett, I think it was actually his second solo show out of school. He's joining in here, so let me loop him in and we can have this conversation. Emmett,
Hey Nina, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Great, great.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Let me go back to an image that is relevant to you and not Lee and Sai's artwork, but I'm gonna pull this one up because I like it, and then I'll let you. Well, here we'll show a more kind of pro image of Emmett's work so that you guys. Um, so Emmett, how you doing?
Doing great. Staying busy here at home. I'm itching to be in the studio, but I'm doing what I can here.
Yeah. So Emmett, hi Rodman, hi Freddie. I
Hey
see so
Rodman.
many good. Sarah's there, and I know Claire is there, and Adriana is there. And this is exactly the Chris. Hi Chris, from Detroit. This is exactly the kind of community I was talking about. It's fantastic to be together, even though we're apart. So, Emmett, you recently had a solo show at the gallery. It was your third exhibition with us, not including Design Miami. And the piece that's up on the screen right now is from that series where you focused on using this poundage. It was clothing poundage. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So this is a show that I did of furniture, sculpture, wall pieces, and design objects made entirely out of secondhand T-shirts. Uh, and that it was kind of the end of a very long process that started in high school, looking at warehouses around Miami that collect clothing and export it.
Mm,
So I live on the Miami River now, and I watch these ships go by, and it made me think about in high school, wondering about this whole economy and all of these businesses that take secondhand clothing, sort it, and then send it to other parts of the world. So um, it started as a research project, I guess, a couple years ago, just trying to figure out exactly where it was coming from and where it was going and what I could do with it. So
yeah.
um,
The river, I just want to back up and kind of tell everyone who might not be familiar with your practice. So, Emmett was born and raised in Miami. We like to joke that we're the only two native Miamians here. And he left, he went to school and studied furniture design at RISD, but he's a graduate of Dash, which is also in the Miami Design District. And there's been a lot of talk about what people call the Miami vernacular in your work. So really thinking about how you incorporate architectural elements that are not necessarily unique to Miami, but certainly feel like Miami, into your practice. And you've used everything from breeze block to neon colors to the sort of the piece behind you, which was a reference, part of a series of works that reference neon, but do so in steel. And this latest body of work, for me, one of the things that was so interesting about it is that it really spoke to a kind of third world economy that is unique to Miami as our role as this kind of bridge between the United States and the rest of the world.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of the things I do like to work with things that are in my periphery, um, mostly just because that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in problem solving and working with what's readily available. And a lot of the idea of the Miami vernacular, I find really interesting because a lot of these elements and materials are universal. And even the idea of importing and exporting used clothing is a global trade, but it is also um, is very Miami, being a port city, um, and being a multicultural city.
So you mentioned also that the river holds a special place in your heart. I think in general the water in Miami does. Emmett's wife is a world champion sailor, and
Hmm.
they are currently finishing up their home on the Miami River. It's a project that was done in collaboration with Architectonica, and your first full-scale architectural piece, really, right? So can you show us some images of that?
Oh, I was going to, but actually I don't see how to do it now.
So you see there should be like a little square at the bottom of your screen with what looks like a picture, like a drawing of a picture.
It is not there. It's not
Oh,
there now. It's not there now that we're doing this together. It was there when I was doing it alone.
I
Um,
wonder if you maybe if you pull them up on your computer, you can flip do you have your computer with you?
yeah, hold on one sec. Let me
Okay.
change locations.
We've done that before. If you just pull them up on I'll show this one in the meantime. These are some images from Emmett's new house, and you can flip them around and show us on the screen.
Um, I can also walk over there. No, let me just.
See if you can pull them up there. So Emmett, you know, Emmett's been working on this house. The house is in one of actually, I believe the oldest residential neighborhood in South Florida. Is that accurate in Miami?
Um, yes, it was one of the first neighborhoods in Miami, on the Miami River. It's called Spring Garden. It was where a lot of early developers of Miami built homes. So while downtown Miami was being developed, this neighborhood was being developed.
And it's where Marjorie Stoneman Douglas lived, right?
Yeah, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas lived here. Several other founding Miamians lived here as well.
And there's a little bit of a movement toward both the preservation of historic architecture in Spring Garden, but also kind of cutting edge architecture. The Brillharts, who are an incredible husband and wife architectural team here, built a louvered house there that was inspired by Sarasota modern architecture, and now your home is going to be there. Um, Great. So tell us what we're looking at, Emmett.
So I'm going to show you some images from the plans, since I can't show you the exact images on my phone, and I'll tell you how we kind of approach the design and the references that we use. So um, we found this empty lot on the Saybold Canal in Spring Garden, and that's a canal that connects to the Miami River. So if you look at this plan here, the Miami River is here, and the canal is here, and our home will be here, where that red square is.
Be careful showing us that, Emmett. I think you're going to have some squatters based on some of the comments in the
Yeah, really. No, don't look at
chat.
the address. I know I wasn't planning on showing these exact plans, but they're nice and convenient here on my computer. And one of the things that we did when we started was we took sort of analysis of homes in the neighborhood,
Mhm.
and because it is a historic district, there are a lot of guidelines about what you can and cannot do. So we wanted to build this contemporary home, so we looked at what other types of structures were in the neighborhood to make our case for doing a contemporary home. And there are, what we learned in this historic district is that there are, it pretty much represents every building style in Miami. So you actually have a couple craftsman bungalows like your home. There's an Art Deco home like this one. The Brillhart home that you mentioned is sort of like a Florida modern home.
Hmm.
Then you have these old wooden homes that are was a very typical style in Florida, and just anything in between. So um, to this industrial building here, which is in the residence, there's several boathouses,
Hmm.
and then ultra contemporary on the canal. So we did that kind of study, and then that gave us the basis for the design. And the two main points of reference were industrial buildings on the Miami River and tropical modernism. So these are the industrial buildings, and then let's see here. This would be tropical modernism. So exposed blocks, large cantilevered overhangs to give shade. These awning windows here
And
that
I
open
just
up.
want to chime in with something that I think I can't ever help but think when I talk to you about your work and particularly this project. So many people like to further this idea that Miami is a city with no history. And I think what's fantastic about what you're showing us here is not only is Miami a city with a history. It's a rich history. It's a rich cultural history, and it's quite creative and resourceful. Like everything that you're showing us kind of feeds into this idea of architecture of necessity, right? Like the cantilever is there to provide shade. The levered windows are there to create a breeze,
Hmm.
and kind of like pull from the natural world and not just fight against it, which I think is certainly something we can all learn from, right? Like you can work in tandem with something.
Absolutely.
And
And
tell us, go ahead, go ahead.
well, a lot of architectural movements around the world were in places that had really temperate weather, and Miami and the
There you go. You froze up for a second, but now I can hear you.
um, Miami and the tropics are can be challenging because of the natural landscape that you're dealing with and the weather. So the way that the architecture is reflected, even in Art Deco and modernism, is really interesting because it's a perfect mirror to what's happening in the natural landscape. And one of the things with this house that we learned along the way was, one of the references that I wanted was these exposed blocks. So to mimic these modernist homes in the 50s and 60s that had exposed architectural blocks, but also
Mhm.
these industrial spaces that I have been in for the past 10 years in my studio. So I thought it was a great reference, and then came to find out that the reason you don't see a lot of exposed blocks in Florida is because you typically have stucco on the outside and drywall on the inside for insulation, and most architectural blocks are not waterproof to the degree that you could use them in a project in Miami. But that also led to a lot of solutions for us. So, these challenges led to their own local solutions. So we found a concrete block that was waterproof and was able to be insulated from the inside. So that enabled us to do an exposed block.
And you and I always talk about, and maybe this is a little bit of a shout out to Craig Robbins, who's the creative patron behind the Design District, is where are the Miami case study homes? When are we going to get a Miami case study project that responds to these issues creatively? And I just want to say hi to Ray Smith from Cuernavaca, Mexico. Hi, Ray, and Mariana probably. But I think that your house, what's so fascinating about this project is that it is that, that you and Sarah are building something that, as Miami natives, rises to the challenge of climate change and works with our environment to produce a creative solution for both home and studio it's efficient, it's climate ready, and it's beautiful. And I think with that, Emma, I want to our time is limited because Instagram Live, kind of keeps us down. But we have about another 15 minutes before we move into Q&A. And
Hmm.
I was hoping you could, if you do want to go through some images of the house, if you can, that would be great. But I also really wanted to talk about some of the renderings and projects that what you've been doing aside from finishing this house while you've been home.
Cool. Maybe if I do this.
And I see Susan Zarkin. Hi, Susan.
Um, well, I want to give a quick shout out to Mia Romanek. It's her birthday today,
Oh,
and
happy birthday, Mia.
one of the things that we've been talking about is how to stay productive during the quarantine. And Mia, I was working on a table for Mia right when this whole thing hit. So she's been very patient, but kind of having several commissions in the works and then having them all stop simultaneously has kind of enabled us to finish this house and finish the specs, the final details and specs on the house. So this is the table that I'm working on for Mia right now.
So Emmett, I'm going to show this, which is a finished example from the same series. So we often work together on commission projects for clients because your work is functional. We regularly have people that come to us with the same kind of parameters as the cabinet that you saw in my own home, which is ostensibly, I love this table. In the case of this particular commission, I love this table, but I want to see it as a dining table, and here are the things that I love about it. Here are the colors that I love. Here are the aspects that I really want you to run wild with. So tell us, Emmett, for me, it's so wonderful to work with you on these kinds of projects because you love the parameters. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I often make prototypes and smaller versions of things, and then we'll either expand on those or do commissions based on those. And this was a great example of making a smaller coffee table version and several lighting objects and things like that. And then meeting Mia and talking to her about what she wanted. So she wanted a dining table, and I took several objects that she liked and that I was interested in. So part of the concept behind this table is that the the hubs that hold it all together are 3D printed.
Hmm.
So it's comprised of these linear elements like wood or steel or aluminum, and then these 3D printed components that are typically functional mechanical elements, like screws or nuts or bolts and things like that. And
Hmm.
those actually hold the table together, but all in a kind of unexpected way. And the scales are all distorted and the colors are all distorted. And that's meant to be a reference to the digital process that it comes from. So if you look at this table closely, there's a wrench holding those two elements together, a key, a gear, chains, screws, a wing nut, a nut. Uh, and this table is actually it's actually 8 feet long, so it's
It's
considerably bigger than that.
substantial. It's
Yeah.
substantial. We said big enough for a dinner party. I saw Rodman on there, and I think Rodman and Rudy, the caveat was big enough for a dinner party with Rodman and Rudy. So we're waiting for that so we can all get together and have that celebration.
Oh
And
yeah,
I
totally.
I also want to point out too that you originally showed that body of work, the 3D printed work in New York City with Patrick Parrish Gallery, who's a
Hmm.
fantastic design gallery that also incorporates really historic programming with contemporary artists and giving the platform to pursue a particular body of work, a particular series.
Hmm.
And it's been great to see how that work has evolved. And so, Emmett, do we have the renderings, or can we not pull those up? Some of the other renderings that we had talked about
Of what? Of the house or of work?
of work.
No, I can pull them up on my computer screen. I just can't do screen sharing. I think since I'm a guest or something, I can't show my pictures.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So it's
but
great. It's good to learn these things while we're
we're
doing
learning
it.
in real time.
I just, I want to say that Emmett and I were texting prior to this, and he usually has something really good up his sleeve when I haven't heard from him for a couple of weeks. And when we started texting, he said, "Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'm not ready to show, or I'm not sure I want to show yet that are in the works." And of course, I was like, "You have to show that immediately." Um, okay, so maybe pan down a little bit because we can't see the. So tell us what we're looking at.
Okay, so one thing, not being able to work on these physical objects in the studio, uh, really led me to work on, like I said, the final finish details and specs on the house project. But also, I was able to visualize some of these concepts that I've had on the back burner for a while. So I've gotten a couple requests to do public seating in the past year, but there's never been the infrastructure or the funding to do the projects. I mean, there was no funding in place or no project in place for these concepts. So they kind of get put, when that happens, they kind of get put on the back burner until the time is right.
Hmm.
So this slow time enabled me to put this model together of this bench that I'd been dreaming up for the past few months. And I made these really fun renderings on this beach with a sailboat. The bench, the idea behind the bench is that it's based on neon signage, another topic that came up earlier, and it has this one long extended tube that returns back and forth for the entire length of the bench, in the same way that neon lettering is the massing is created by this bending of the tube. So the shape is based on a wave, and the form is based on neon signage. And the idea was to create this bench, a public bench that was uh, not just a small sort of segment of a bench, but a massive bench that could seat a large amount of people. So to create this, rather than having, in a public setting, you often have these small benches that are staggered in different areas.
Hmm.
And I wanted to make one 30-foot long bench that could be a singular object in one particular area.
So there's
So,
two things that strike me about this. First, hi, Katie. Katie says thank you for taking us to the beach. That Katie Spout is on here. We love you. And but there's two things that strike me about this that I think are often present in your work. One is the use of shadow as a way to create complexity with the piece. Because if you go back to the image of, yeah, this one, it creates this unbelievable line drawing um, in the, out of its shadow. And I think this is also a very, I mean, it would work in Los Angeles, but it's like only in a city with relentless sunlight would you see this kind of extreme shadow from a
hmm
piece. And I think that that's so great. It shows so much restraint, and I feel like you're always doing that, where the object is not only the object, but the way the object activates the space and the architecture around itself, or the
hmm
non-architecture, right? Like in this case, the concrete or the beach or wherever it would be.
hmm
Um, and the other thing that I think is really incredible about this that comes up in your work a lot is it's sort of deceptively simple, right? Like to fabricate this in this way would be pretty complex, no?
Yeah, so I think both of those ideas are prevalent in my work, and I think some of that is with my process. I often spend months working on a piece, doing the drawings and models and mock-ups before I actually execute it.
Yeah.
And I think, and so a lot of these things like the shadows or these things that are subtle come from just thinking about the proportions, spacing, material, and connections for so long that it brings out all of these unexpected things, or things that appear to be unexpected were somewhat planned.
Totally.
Um,
Totally.
so yeah, and so this piece, and this piece is actually quite simple, and it looks pretty minimal as far as structure, but it is buildable. But as you said, it'd be extremely challenging to build, um, which also makes it special. The bench is about 30 feet long, and it returns about 15 times. So, in theory, it's about a 500-foot long aluminum tube that's just bent back and forth over and over again until
You
you
just
get this one.
you can't it doesn't work if you're not torturing yourself in the process. The challenge of making it happen.
Yeah. No, it
Um,
has to. It has to be. I mean, it's beautiful to me to make these objects that are so difficult to produce, but then when they're done, it seems easy.
yeah. We went through that with one of the pieces at Design Miami, which was all these hand machined cans. They were each individually made. And, if we had a dollar for every person that came through saying, cool, you just like glued together all these soda cans or whatever, but you love that, I know you love that play.
Yeah.
So, Emmett, we have about, 10 minutes roughly before we get cut off by the Instagram. I don't know if you have something else you want to show us or if we want to open it up. I see Boris Idmas on there. Hi, Boris.
Hey, Boris. Let me show you one more thing I'm cooking up.
Okay.
Um,
And
and
in the
then
meantime, I'll just say this while Emma is showing this next piece. If anyone has questions, just type them into the chat. And then when we're done looking at the work, we can scroll back through them.
yes. So this is a
Oh, I haven't
rendering.
seen this. I haven't seen this.
It's somewhat auspicious, I guess, that I mean, these two renderings I'm showing you are these tropical scenes. Maybe it's somewhat because I want to leave the house. It's kind of like a fantasy,
It's
but
wishful thinking. It's
wishful
wishful
thinking.
thinking.
But also, I guess, the use of this idea of the vernacular or the local environment. Um, so this is a piece I've been thinking about for a while. Um, I've thought about making. I've used a lot of concrete in my work, and I thought about the idea of making an artificial reef using a sculpture. Um, and this would be and also building this home and studio. Uh, I've been really interested in architectural elements and isolating them. So in other pieces I've made, I've taken awning frames and taken them away from the buildings, or referenced plan views of architecture or windows as picture frames and things like that. So this would be an underwater staircase that could serve as an artificial reef. And this also, it comes from the show that I did at your gallery, Fracture, where certain architectural elements are split and fractured and disjointed in different ways. And part of the interest in that is that a lot of these systems that are meant to be that design systems and fabrication systems that are meant to work perfectly when they're executed in real life are often disconnected in these really interesting ways.
I love this and seeing it, it's funny. Somebody somebody just put in the chat, Jimena Caminos was working on an artificial reef project using a sculpture from Miami Beach, but it got put on hold because of COVID. And I think, the idea of intervening in the natural world, our kids were, and their teacher Lang was on here. So hi Lang, if you're still here, but our kids were working on an Andy Goldsworthy project. And, I remember reading this sort of controversial take, right? Like, should we be intervening? Is it the artist's role? Where does the line of damage and productivity lie? And I think this
Hmm.
speaks so well to all of that, and I think this would be an incredible piece to see come to life. And of course, it's the first time I'm seeing it, so immediately I'm like the wheels are spinning. So,
Well, I think also, I mean, when it comes to a lot of the things I'm interested in, it is about functionality and how maybe the function from a certain object can be removed and a new function can be asserted in a certain way.
Yeah.
So the staircases have interested me because they're, especially in relation to the water, because a staircase is sort of functional in any level of water.
And the constraint that you couldn't, well, you were thinking about, I wasn't doing anything other than paying for it, but you were thinking about that, you know, the the craftsmen were very specific to the craft, right? So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
couldn't
and
just,
that the color. This is a great example because the three different colors in this piece are directly referential to to your home and to the location. So the piece is built based on the dimensions of the wall and on the space of the cabinet that was there before. So the white paint on the piece is meant to reference the wall, as if this piece is emerging from the wall itself. Um, the ash, the natural wood, was meant to be a nod to this uh, craftsman era of woodworking and return to craft. And then the black components were all using an ebonized process where I mixed um, red wine and um, iron oxide to create this black pigment. And that was, that was also a reference to the craft,
yeah.
um, but I wanted these three, the shelf emerges from the wall at three different planes.
There you go. You're back. You froze up for a second, but we
Sorry,
got you.
people keep calling me. Um, but yeah, that's a great example because each specific color or tone was done for a different reason. And
Totally.
yeah.
It's the history, it's the history and the context, you know, the concept and the context. So there's a few other questions. One I can answer very quickly, which was how did we meet? And we met a couple of different ways, which is pretty funny. Tom, right? Tom El
Hmm.
had a gallery in what was then known as the 2020 building, which was an interesting space in Wynwood with a lot of artist studios. And Tom was running a small space, and I saw Emmett's first show there and became really interested in his work. And then my sister-in-law, who was an attorney, said, my boss's son is an artist. You should meet
Hmm.
him. And I was sort of, that's, how am I going to get out of this? But it turned out the boss's son was Emmett. And so I knew his work and was already interested in his practice. And I invited you to have a show. And that was how long ago? 8, 9 years, something like that.
Maybe yeah, I think 2012 maybe. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
8 years.
Quite some time. Okay, so two more questions. Kevin McAlernan. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Hey
Long
Kevin, how's
time
it
no
going?
see. He says, how high is your house raised for floodplain? I have used the exposed insulated blocks as well. And then I'll give you the other question too,
Hmm.
which is, do you think great design can help make Miami green again? Better design for solar panels and such.
Yes. And thank you all. Thank you. So the house is 5 feet above grade. That means the first floor, which is the studio, is 5 feet above the ground. The which is basically the garage space, which is the studio space. And it's unusual, as Kevin knows, to have, well, it's not required or normal to have a garage above grade, but usually just the habitable areas. Um, so our first floor is 5 feet above grade, which is about 10 feet above sea level, and the actual residence is something like 16.4 above grade. Um, and the other important thing about that is the entire home is on these little stilts. I'm going to try to find an image. And it's open underneath. And it has a French drain under the house so that if there is flooding, via storm surge or sea level rise or rainwater, the house can naturally drain on its own, on itself. So yeah, a lot of times when you build a home, you kind of cover a certain amount of land, and this house doesn't. Oh, actually, you can see it up here. I mean, this is the way it looks. It's open underneath. So that's about
Super.
a 4 foot space, crawl space underneath. And as far as being green, having that ability to flood in itself and grading the land properly, you can collect a lot of rainwater and grow plants and things like that. And our whole property is graded inward toward itself and towards those drains, so it collects water. And the roof is a flat roof, which is the perfect roof for solar panels. So we're installing solar at the moment to maximize that efficiency also. Is that
Fantastic.
all? Is that the? I can't see the questions actually. So
That was the bulk. There were a few others, but we're at our time limit. So I basically, before we get cut off, want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on here. Special thank you to Miami Design District for having us and always supporting culture in South Florida. And if you guys have any questions about Emmett, his work, his practice, feel free to reach out to the gallery. It's Nina Johnson. We're ninajohnson.com or Instagram, Nina Johnson Gallery, all of that good stuff. And yeah, we'll archive this. This will be archived.